Irish spelling. Anything less would be uncivilized. So come follow me there too. I do enjoy hearing from everybody, and in all three of those platforms, you can send me notes. And those of you who have been sending me notes and letters, thank you. I appreciate that. It's nice to hear that you're enjoying the show, or if you're relating to something that you share with me, how it relates to your life. So, we're really a family here, not just those of us in the studio, but people throughout the world who are our regular listeners. All of God's children are endowed with extraordinary purpose and ability. I'm on a quest to help as many as possible in fully realizing their divinely inspired potential. Disposing of false narrative and embracing genuineness inspires clarity of purpose. My role is to help overcome self-imposed limitations in realizing one's spiritual potential. And as I like to share with you each week, one of the places that not only do I like to support, but it supports me quite a bit, is Claremont Pharmacy. And that's owned by Dr. Nikki Ho. And if you really want a place where you're treated with dignity and love, you're a real person, not a number, not just an insurance claim, go to Claremont Pharmacy. It's on the corner of Indian Hill Boulevard and Arrow Highway. They take care of everything I need. And I appreciate the fact that they let me know when I have a prescription coming up, particularly for my diabetes. It's very important to take care of. And with all the different, my heart stuff and everything, they have me covered. So when you go in there, tell Dr. Nikki Ho that I said hello. And they do have the vaccines. They have the Moderna, and they have the J&J, the Johnson & Johnson, the one and done. So if you haven't gotten vaccinated yet, go see Nikki. She'll take care of you. And a little secret to all you out there, now don't tell anybody that I told you this. She is the best at giving a shot of anyone I've ever met. When I get my flu shots and everything there, I don't even feel the needle. So I'm really impressed with her ability to do that. And also, if you have an event coming up, I want to personally recommend Lakeside DJ Services. And you can find them at lakesidedjservices.com. It is owned and operated by our dear sound engineer, Frank. And also he has a photo booth. And really, it's a great time. And those of you watching on YouTube, you could see photos of this right now. This guy has his act together. So if you really want someone who's going to take care of your event and take care of it right, who will do what you want done, not what their agenda is, Frank is the man to get a hold of. LakesideDJServices.com. And also, before we get into our guest this evening, one last thing I want to share with you. This is not a paid advertisement. It's just me sharing with you something that's very important to me because I care about you, and I want you to have the best of information on things, and that is Justice Matters with Glenn Kirshner. It's on YouTube, and Glenn is the best of the best of the best. He talks about, as you can tell, Justice Matters, issues with justice. He was a federal prosecutor for 30 years. He was also a JAG lawyer in the United States Army, served for 6.5 years there as a prosecutor. He's a personal friend of mine, and I recommend him because his integrity is impeccable. And I totally am honored to call him friend. He's a good man, and he's truly honest, and he won't give you bad information. So Justice Matters, look it up on YouTube. Tonight I'm really excited. One of our favorite guests on the show and my dear friend and my fill-in host, Dr. John Smith, has agreed to come in tonight because there's a lot of stuff going on with people with relationships, with COVID and coming out of the lockdown. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when relationships break up, but also some of the stress put on relationships from COVID. Let me tell you a little bit for those of you who don't know Dr. Smith. Dr. John Smith is a psychotherapist. He is a PhD. He's a professor and author of the book, The Authentic Man, A Guide to Happiness and Purpose. And he's really a good man, and probably one of my closest friends, They say we're brothers, but neither one of us have turned 13 yet.
That's right. We're still in junior high.
We're trying our best, and someday we may get there. But Dr. Smith, welcome back to the show.
I'm so excited to be back. So thank you for having me. And this is a special one for me because I'm still here. I had a little accident about a week ago, and I'm very lucky to be sitting here. So
yes, you are.
Me. Yes.
If I may indulge, may share a little bit, he had a fall through a window and nicked an artery, and the fact that he is here in studio is nothing less than a miracle because I've seen the wounds, and it was nothing shy of a miracle that
Pretty nasty.
You were here.
I kind of look like Frankenstein right now with all the stitches, but I made it. But yeah, it was touch and go there a little bit with that artery. So thank you for mentioning that. I appreciate it. But yeah, it was a little bit of a close call for sure.
I didn't realize that until you just said that. You are a little green.
It's the Irish in me.
Yeah, I got you.
So,
Anyhow, people have gone through a lot with COVID, and one of the things that's happened a great deal, excuse me, is the disillusionment of relationships. And you and I were talking before the show that the difference between the breakup of a relationship and a death is when someone dies, you don't run into them at the supermarket. When somebody dies, you don't have to split up the friends. And things along those lines. So while a death is certainly traumatic, and I'm not taken from that, the end of a relationship is a trauma in itself.
absolutely.
And that can be very painful. You want to talk a little bit about what people can go through?
Sure. I mean, endings are hard. Even though we could always say, well, the ending is one door closing and another door opening. So, and in the long run, that may be true. So sometimes when we end something, we're on the way to something even greater or better. And the universe has a way of ending things that are maybe, let me put it this way. You go to the grocery store and you buy a carton of milk.
Okay.
Right? And somewhere on that carton of milk is a date.
Yes.
They call it an expiration date, right?
Yes.
So your relationship with that carton of milk is going to end on or about that date, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens if you keep it past that date?
It spoils.
That's right. Spoils and turns sour, right? So you wouldn't want to keep drinking the spoiled milk, right?
Right.
Well, did you know every relationship ends? Some last a short time and we wish they would have lasted longer, and some last a long time and they probably should have been shorter, and some last a lifetime, but eventually they all end one way or the other, right?
Till death do us part.
The problem is when we get into a relationship with another person, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship or whatever, they don't come stamped with an expiration date. So
Right.
We don't go into it usually thinking of when the milk's going to turn sour, when is it going to end. But there are those relationships that end for whatever reason, and that's because the milk went sour. Now, what caused the milk to go sour? Well, both people usually contributed to it. It wasn't necessarily one thing or the other, but once the milk went sour, many people go, well, all right, I'll just stay in that relationship and I'll try to make it work.
Right.
Which, okay. The problem is once the milk goes sour, what is the problem?
You start getting the toxicity of it, and
Right.
it becomes poisonous.
Right, and it's rare.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say never, but it's rare that milk ever gets fresh again.
Right.
So, unfortunately, once it's spoiled, it's spoiled. And
Right.
for many people, it's best at that point to kind of move on. But a lot of people have a problem with that for many, many reasons. They're afraid. They're, terrified of the unknown.
Religious reasons.
That's right. I've had many people say, I know this is toxic, but I can't leave because, that's what my my religion says, I can't get divorced or I have to stay or whatever. I've known people in very violent, brutal domestic violence relationships who, for that reason, said, I can't leave because.
Yeah, and I've had cases where people were, beat up awful, where one spouse was beating up the children. And I have one that's coming to mind right now where the mother of the children would take the kids into the next room after they were beaten up and say, Dad was an orphan. We have to help him be a good father. Like a 5-year-old is going to help them be a good father.
Right.
I want to throw in there real quick as well. In my view, relationships fail, not people failing.
Yes.
And oftentimes people think that they failed because the relationship came to an end. And sometimes the relationship comes to an end because you got healthy.
I'll even go a step further.
Good.
Does the relationship actually fail, or does it end? And if it fails, if we call it that, was it really a failure or was it an ending?
Right.
Right. And then is the person, if anything, we could maybe say they failed to leave sooner.
Yes. Well, and we were talking a little bit about this earlier, that oftentimes people stay in a relationship because they're afraid of being alone. They don't realize they're more alone in that relationship, because there's nothing worse than laying next to the person you're supposed to be in love with and being absolutely alone. That's a special kind of loneliness. And while it's so lonely, at least it's familiar. I know how to deal in this, even though I'm miserable.
Yes.
But I don't have to take that risk of, will I be alone for the rest of my life? Well, you're alone now.
Yeah, but that's one of those things people tend to think, well, maybe this will get better. And I'm not saying that, if things are rough, you shouldn't try to work it out. I mean,
Right, that's not what we're saying.
That's I think, if a relationship's that serious and important, you want to do everything you possibly can to work things out, but there comes a point where the milk has turned sour enough that it's no longer going to be able to be, it won't last. It's already gone.
Right, and some relationships are salvageable. There's some things that marriage counseling can help, but there are some that there needs to be a decision. Are we going to marriage counseling or divorce counseling?
Yeah.
Because I think divorce counseling is just as important as marriage counseling.
Absolutely.
Because
that's because there's often children involved, and
right.
It's divorce is a weird thing. It's like we're in part we're dissolving this bond, this relationship, this emotional connection, and then we're dissolving a business.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's really hard to tear those two things apart because they tend to get intertwined very often.
Yeah, and so tonight we're going to be talking about some of this, and I know we're going a couple minutes early to the commercial, but I don't want Frank to break up with me and the show,
no,
so we're going to go to commercial. And my guest tonight is Dr. John Smith, and we will be back in 90 seconds on Viewpoint with Father John.
102.3 FM, K292 FQ, Riverside.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org. www.4pfp as in personal funeral planning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
It's time to shop in the cool, relaxed comfort of the Tri-City Shopping Center in Redlands, conveniently located on the I-10 freeway between the Alabama and Tennessee exits. Bring the kids too and watch them play in the only indoor fun center. High Five Indoor Playground, where parents are welcomed on the playground. Birthday celebrations are encouraged, so make plans for some great fun at the mall. More reasons why the Tri-City Center is called the Mall with a Heart. KCAA.
And welcome back. You're tuned to NBC Radio, KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen from anywhere around the world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reed. And again, I want to remind you, if you're looking for the best DJ services, you're going to want Lakeside DJ Services, which is at lakesidedjservices.com. And particularly for the photo booth. Now, I know that this last weekend, Frank had like 4 different photo booth sessions. This weekend, he has some. And the reason he gets so many is because he's that good. And he's a lot of fun. You ever go to one of those photo booths where people are just, come on, put the costume on, get in there. That's not how Frank is. Frank really has a good time. And, he's there to help you have a great time. So, Lakeside DJ Services. .com. I feel like I should be saying .com.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so Dr. Smith and I, my guest, Dr. John Smith, who is author of that wonderful book, The Authentic Man, A Guide to Happiness and Purpose.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I can't tell you how many times I reread that book because there's so much good stuff in there that every time I read it, I don't know how you do it, but somehow you sneak in that book and you write something that wasn't there before, and how you keep the typeset just the way it looked
Exactly,
before.
yeah.
I'm impressed, man. That's cool.
That's good. Little things pop out, just when you need them the most, right? Just when they're pertinent, they kind of pop out at you. So, well, that's
At
a
least when
great
we're young.
compliment.
At least
Thank
when we're
you.
young.
Yeah, that's a great. Thank you.
So we're talking about the relationship stuff. And you might say, well, why are you guys talking about the breakup of relationships? Because during COVID, both of us, as people who are therapists, have seen the stress that being on lockdown has put on relationships. Before, we had a chance to get away from each other. Now, that may sound kind of callous to some people, but it's a very important thing that you have a little away time so you can come back and appreciate each other and really enjoy it. Does that have to be that way for every relationship? No. But in a lot of relationships, it helps keep it fresh, if you will. Mm-hmm. But also, all that time together, you start noticing things, and correct me if I'm wrong, you start noticing things that you didn't notice before because you're right there.
Yes.
24/7.
Well, there's 2 things that are going on. You mentioned about, we used to be able to probably get away from each other, and so each person would go out and get fed.
Right.
Okay, and then they would bring that extra
helping
home, and both people would have something to feed each other. We've been stuck together, and we've literally been feeding off of one another
with food that's getting old
in stressful times. And when people are under stress, then they don't always communicate well, or I need something, but you're under stress, so you can't give it to me. But if I depend on you to give it to me, and you're not there, now I develop resentment, or I develop anger, or as you said, I feel alone.
And I'm going to throw one more thing into the mix of that, and I'd like to get your input on this. The political climate. There's so much hostility right now, and this isn't going to be a political conversation. Don't worry, folks. But there's so much heat right now in our politics that can't help but come home, and pretty soon I see people, exploding on the one that they love when they're angry with somebody else,
Yeah.
And that's not so good for the relationship either.
No, and you hit the nail on the head. I mean, unfortunately, it seems like in the entire world right now, everybody's angry.
Right.
And everybody's looking. It's like in one of we call it a defense mechanism. It's called displacement. And what's displacement? It's the boss yells at you, you come home and you yell at the wife yells at the kid, and the kid kicks the dog. So
Right.
we displace our anger onto somebody or something else, and it's, then it's a vicious cycle. It never ends. So I think you're right. We're bringing this anger with no place to put it, no real direction for it. Everybody's blaming everybody else for something. Everybody's arguing, fighting. The behavior I've seen, not only just, politically and on TV, but just people, how they're treating each other, what they're saying to each other, how they're driving on the highway or the freeway, how they're, it just seems like nobody really cares anymore about each other. There's no courtesy. There's no manners, if you will, and maybe I'm getting too old because, they taught me manners when I grew up, but I don't see people having many of those these days. So it's all, and so think about it. If I am not treating others that way, then am I treating my own relationships that way, the same way?
Yes, and on that note, with this and all the hostility, I've been seeing friendships of many years length ending. And I think social media has contributed a great deal to that because people say things on Facebook that they would not say face to face.
An anonymity, sort of, yeah.
Yeah, even though you know who each other are, but there's something there where we feel emboldened, and we don't stop to think, wait, this is someone I have loved and been friends with for a long time, but they have a different opinion. You say the two things you never talk about, religion and politics.
Right. What is everybody talking about these days? Exactly.
Both of them. And both have become weapons upon which to abuse one another with.
Yeah. So it's that general lack of outlet for all of these pent-up feelings and emotions, stress, frustrations, and who do we have? We tend to take those things out on the people that are closest to us, unfortunately, and hence here we are tonight talking about relationships breaking up and ending, and I think we're just starting to see the beginning of it. I think there are a lot of those situations that exist out there, and as things start to open back up, maybe that'll be a good thing. But if I were, a marriage therapist, I would certainly be getting ready because they're going to be knocking on your door pretty soon if they aren't already.
We're talking about Steven Seagal on the way out, and he has a movie, and I'm sorry, the name of the movie is slipping my mind. I'll wake up tonight at midnight and that's it. But he's playing a cop in this movie. He has some anger issues, so they send him to anger management, and one of the mantras they would do during this group is they'd all say, why am I mad and what am I mad at? And the idea is to find out what these things are. And while we laugh about that, there's really some truth to it that we have to ask ourselves, why am I mad and what am I mad at? Because oftentimes I've found that I can be angry about something that has nothing to do with this situation. So I'm angry here. And I think it's this thing, but it's this other thing. One thing I tell couples quite often in therapy, and I'm sure you do things similar, is that when it comes to the problems, we sail over the mountains, but we trip where the mouse turns because it's the little things that we sweep under the carpet,
Right.
and then we don't see them. We trip over them. We think we're fighting about this, but we're really fighting about this other unresolved issue.
Exactly. It's not usually when couples argue and fight. It's usually about one of about 3 or 4 things that are pretty common. But generally, it isn't about any of those things. That's just happens to be the battleground. Usually, what it boils down to is a power struggle.
Right.
And very often, it's this need to be right. It's this need to, so I call it right fighting.
Right.
You know, we get in these arguments about proving the other person wrong or proving yourself right, and usually they don't go very well, and they escalate because there is no winner and loser, or if there is, somebody walks away feeling hurt and less than.
Yeah, and quite often, and you and I have spoken about this before, but I use this quite a bit with couples, is learning how to get out of who's right and into what's right.
Ooh, I like that one.
And that can be more difficult than it sounds, because we have to step back. What's right? We're both committed to a relationship. What's right? Both are deserving of dignity. What's right? Both are deserving of respect. And in a power struggle, as you mentioned, both parties always lose.
Yeah.
One only seems to win.
Right.
But how much did you win when you're sleeping on the couch
Exactly.
or having to go to a motel?
Or when the person walked away and they felt less love or respect for you because of the situation. There was a piece that got chipped away, and maybe over time too many pieces get chipped away, and now there's nothing left.
Right. And they often say, what happened to us? We used to be so in love.
Uh-huh.
Well, you went from being in love to being right. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you're right alone. And you know, and we're not being flip with this. This is serious stuff. And so in making this stuff work, and I'd like to get your insight on this. In order for me to be healthy in a relationship, one, I need to know what are my issues, not their issues. What are my issues?
Yeah.
And with these issues, is it workable in this relationship? You know, you've probably heard me say a million times, and I think you sometimes do this too. With a couple, one of the exercises I like to use is for each one to write down what their 5 basic needs are and what their 3 deal breakers are. And they're not supposed to coach each other on this. They're supposed to do it separately and then come back to the next counseling session with this. And then we do the effective listening and echoing back, where the one
Right.
person says what their needs are without interruption, and we do it one by one. And then the partner will say, this is what I think you're trying to say. And the other one says yes or no. You don't have to agree, but you have to understand.
Right. Right.
And then it goes the other way.
So you're teaching communication skills, you're teaching listening skills, and what do we want? Probably the word would be empathy, understanding, seeking to understand where the other
Right.
person's coming from, even if you don't agree.
Yeah, and when people say that we don't communicate, you know, we just don't communicate, that's a fallacy. We're always communicating. But are we communicating what we mean to communicate?
Yeah.
Or are we communicating something we don't realize we're communicating?
Right.
And that's why it's important to see, what am I bringing to this? Where are you hearing from what I'm saying? And what changes can I make on my end to make it more understandable? Not that you're trying to change me, but because I can see in this conversation, I'm saying this, but you're hearing this.
Right.
And neither person's bad here. We're not speaking the same language.
Sometimes you get so caught up in that you need a referee.
Exactly.
And that's what a counselor can do. A good counselor isn't going to necessarily tell you what to do.
Right.
But the counselor is going to teach you how to work together. But, you know, a good counselor is going to be able to be the referee, and hopefully they're going to be able to speak each partner's language, and so that they could interpret what the other one was trying to say and teach some of these, I guess, communication, languaging skills. But yeah, the counselor is a referee.
Yeah, that's why in my office I keep a striped shirt and a black bow tie.
Yep, I knew that, yes.
And then we start with each session with, let's get ready to
Rumble! Yeah, exactly.
Had to do it.
Oh, yeah.
We're both going to get notices for that, saying that we
just
did a copyright.
Violated yep.
And we're going to say Frank made us do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Frank's looking at the booth like, uh-huh.
I even forget the name of the guy. He's famous that
I
says
know.
that. So I'm sorry, mister, if I forgot your name, but, you know.
So you can
live
forget a
on.
lawsuit.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't even know who you are. So,
Yeah.
so, Dr. Smith, what makes this so darn hard to do?
Well, one, there's a lot of emotion involved, and when we are emotionally aroused, whether it's anger, whether it's fear, whether it's love, and a lot of times what we express as anger is really fear,
Right.
right? But when we're emotionally aroused, literally what happens is that our rational mind shuts off.
Yes.
And the more emotional we become, the less rational we are able to be. It's not that you can't. It's like whoever came up with this idea of when you're really angry, start counting to 10,
Uh-huh.
they're fools. Because when you get to a certain anger level, let's say about a 7 or an 8, your intellectual mind shuts down. You can't think about counting from 1 to 10. It's usually go time.
The lizard mind doesn't know about counting.
Exactly. So being emotionally aroused that makes communications really difficult because we can't engage in effective communication when we're emotionally aroused, because literally we can't engage the part of our mind that's rational.
No, it's just fight or flight and trying to survive.
Yeah.
You know, and who can be rational in the middle of that?
Right. Well, exactly. But people get frustrated. You're not hearing me. Well, you're not saying it when you're not, and so it escalates.
Yeah, and you keep saying that. You keep saying that.
Right.
Yeah, and I still don't feel heard.
Right. So, the worst time to fight is when you're angry.
Exactly.
I know that
absolutely.
sounds weird, but that's really the worst time to do it is when you're both angry.
Well, there's an old expression. Speak when you're angry, and you'll make the greatest speech you'll ever regret.
Yeah.
I can't remember who said that.
Was it what's the other one? Anger is like a poison, and you drink and hope the other person
will
dies.
die.
Yeah.
Yeah, the resentment thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, are there some techniques that you can recommend in getting out of the who's right and into what's right? And do you believe in taking a 15-minute break? Do you what do you suggest?
Well, okay, so some of these are going to sound kind of silly, but they actually
okay.
do work. Okay, so I think each couple in calm times before there's a fight need to come up with some rules.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, if you Google fair fighting rules, there's tons of little handouts that you can look at, or you can write down. But you need to agree to these rules.
Well, we use them on our workshops. We do.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing would be, and again, it may sound silly, but if you come up with a silly code word, it
Okay.
doesn't have to be the same word for each of you. But each of you come, like popcorn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What that means, at least one of you is saying, popcorn, time out.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do, one of the rules is you agree to take a break.
Right.
How much time, it depends on what the situation is, but at least enough time to go cool off, think about it, let your rational mind engage, let your emotional mind calm down.
Mm-hmm.
But have an agreement that you're not just walking away and you're not going to come back to it. So the agreement is, I'm going to walk away, I'm going to cool down, and then when ready, we'll come back together and we'll discuss it. All right. So that way the other person doesn't feel like, well, you just got up and walked away and I want to resolve this. But I know a lot of people that chase after the person because we're going to solve this right now. We're going to finish this.
Right.
And that's just creating more of an argument. It's just creating more arousal. And all right. One other thing that I recommend is that, remember, if I'm already angry,
Right.
or aroused or afraid or whatever, if I'm emotionally aroused before I even talk to you,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't take much to go from a 7 to a 10.
Right.
So that means I have to manage my own, I call it my anger temperature or anger. So a little exercise I teach people is to take their anger temperature.
Right.
and keep a little thermometer, or they can do it, in their head, or they can actually, sometimes I'll actually give them a little piece of paper with a little thermometer on it. And from a scale of 1 to 10, what's your anger temperature?
Right.
And you don't want to, if it starts getting up to 5, that's when by that point, you can still do something about it.
Okay.
Go for a walk, go do something to chill out. All these things that they teach you work when you are at about a 5 or below. Once you start creeping up over 5, then that's when the fight or flight kicks in, and it's really hard to do all of those things or even think to do those things. So you want to take that anger temperature 3-4 times a day. Well, how do I remember to do that? Well, another little exercise, which these happen to be in my book.
Yes, they are.
But is the wake up alarm. You set these little reminder alarms about 4 times a day, and that's your cue when they go off, is to take your temperature.
Right.
What is it? Because if I can measure it, I can manage it.
And also, don't post it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
You won't believe what he did or he said. No.
Yeah, exactly. And whatever you do, and then we'll go to commercial breakout after this, is don't bring family and friends in on this. There's a time to talk to family and friends, not in the middle of this, because they hear that you're hurt, and that's all they hear, and the other person doesn't stand a chance. And no matter how well you have made up, the friends and family will only see that this person hurt someone I love, and there's no coming back from that.
Right.
And so when I'm doing premarital counseling, a lot of times I say, look, here's some important things before you get married. And speaking of good relationships, Frank's looking at me like, for the sake of our relationship, we better go to commercial. My guest this evening is the one and only Dr. John Smith.
We'll be back.
And you are listening to Viewpoint with Father John. We'll be back in 90 seconds.
.3 FM, K292 FQ, Riverside.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org. www.4pfp, as in personal funeral planning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
It's time to shop in the cool, relaxed comfort of the Tri-City Shopping Center in Redlands, conveniently located on the I-10 freeway between the Alabama and Tennessee exits. Bring the kids too and watch them play in the only indoor fun center, High Five Indoor Playground, where parents are welcomed on the playground. Birthday celebrations are encouraged, so make plans for some great fun at the mall. More reasons why the Tri-City Center is called the Mall with a Heart. KCAA.
And welcome back. You're tuned to NBC Radio, KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen from anywhere around the world, even in your favorite phone booth. Look that up, kids, at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reed, and my guest this evening is the one and only Dr. John Smith, psychotherapist, professor, author. I really do want to recommend his book, The Authentic Man, A Guide to Happiness and Purpose, not just for men. I have a couple women clients who have read the book that have just really benefited.
Oh, great. That's
And
what's
I've been
my
so
intention.
glad. Yeah, and they tell me, look, this is good stuff. I needed this. So I highly recommend the book. Again, it's The Authentic Man, A Guide to Happiness and Purpose. Available on Amazon and any online
Yeah, it's
bookstore.
really, I saw it's all over the place now. So Walmart's and my Amazon and wherever you can get books, you can get that book. So
And it's in my library.
I appreciate that. That's great.
So we're talking about when we went to commercial. You know, I'd mentioned that when doing premarital counseling, I shared with them that some of the important things is to, when you're having a fight, you know, don't bring the family in. And we're not talking about keeping 6 secrets. We're talking about giving your relationship a chance. Because they don't understand you getting better, not because they don't want to, but because of their love for you. They just
Right.
know you were hurt.
Right.
And facts and feelings are two different worlds. And when they get brought in on this on the feeling level, they can't see the facts that you just went through, what a lot of couples go through.
All right.
They see the feelings of it. And with these problems, if when the relationship ends, if we had bad habits in the one relationship that just ended, if we don't get help to see things, uncover, discover, and discard, as my friend Chuck Chamberlain used to say, we will take these things into the next relationship, you know, same soup, different bowl.
Yeah.
And we quite often say in both psychology and theology that until we learn our lesson from the experience, we must re-experience the lesson. But when history repeats itself, the price goes up.
Absolutely.
And
And I can attest to that personally as well as professionally, that's definitely the case. And sometimes the lesson is very difficult to learn, and so it just keeps coming up until one
gift that keeps on
learns it,
giving.
or it's, you know, you go to your grave without learning it. So
let's talk about, if we could, let's say the relationship has come to an end. What are some things that we can do so we can stop beating ourselves up for the ending of the relationship, and so that we can move forward and not keep practicing the same thing that's not healthy
right.
in the way we have relationships with people?
And this is one of the more difficult things for most people, because in order to, well, first of all, we're dealing with grief and
Right.
loss.
Yes.
You know, when you mentioned earlier about, you know, it's sometimes it might even be, in some cases, worse than death.
Yes.
Because not only are you grieving the loss of the relationship itself and what was, and, you know, you're also many times going to be grieving the loss of friends and other family who have either taken sides or who have, you know, are no longer part of the scene. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and there are times when you can't, you know, you have to go through some of that journey all alone.
Yes. Sometimes you even have to change churches because
Yeah.
because the people you're close to in the church love both of you going through this, and they feel like they have to pick friends, and it's uncomfortable with either one of you or both of you show up at the church, so you wind up both going to different churches too.
So I think it's important that you have an ally, you know, that can help you walk, not necessarily do it for you, or not even somebody that's going to tell you all the things to do, but somebody who's going to walk with you and be there to support you and kick you in the butt when you need to be kicked and pull you along when you need to be pulled. And, you know, that can be a really close friend, although I'm going to admit sometimes close friends aren't the best because they're too close.
Right.
Okay, so you need somebody that's going to have your best interest in mind, but who also is going to tell you like it is.
And be objective.
Yeah, and sometimes that is a professional.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's, again, another role for a counselor or therapist, is to be that objective person who can help hold your hand and guide you and nudge you and whatever. It doesn't exclude friends and or family or whatever. It just means that sometimes they aren't the most helpful or they aren't the most objective. So, you know, that's what I would recommend first.
And sometimes in therapy, you can fall apart so you can fall together.
Yeah.
And that's quite a process, because if I can't fall apart and let all this out, you can't put the pieces back together
Right.
in a new way, in a mosaic emotionally, that makes a new beautiful picture.
Well, exactly. And I mean, you and I are both therapists, so we understand about it. A lot of people still have a stigma about seeking help and going to therapy, and they're probably thinking, well, all these guys do is tell you to go see a shrink, and that's not exactly what I'm saying. All right, I know the value of it, and you don't have to be, we call it crazy or sick or disturbed or mentally ill or whatever. In fact, very often, seeing a therapist can prevent that from happening, rather than as a result of it, you go see the therapist. So I'm recommending it. It doesn't take the place of friends and family and folks like that, but
Right.
like I say, they can't always be objective.
And as much as they love you or love me as family members, they may not be able to tell us the family members everything as well. May not feel safe.
Right.
And
You'd be surprised how many people that I, after a relationship ends, and then all of a sudden these friends or family member come up, well, I never had the courage to tell you, but I always thought that. And then they tell you the truth, and you go, God, why didn't you tell me that? Well, because I didn't think that you would listen, or I didn't think it was a good thing, or I didn't want to
hurt your
I didn't
feelings.
want to hurt your feelings. Exactly.
I've had a few couples in the past that I wouldn't marry because I knew that their relationship was toxic. And I had one that was a Ken and Barbie set. Both were professional models. They really were, and professional actors. And I said, look, kids, the only time you get along is when you're in the sack. So just do that. You have no business being married, because you will kill each other.
Yeah.
And they were angry, and so they had someone else do it. And the guy came back, I don't know, almost 2 years later. He says, I wish I'd listened to you. You were absolutely right. I barely got out with my life.
Yeah.
And so, and we don't
That's
say these
scary.
things to be...
Barbie with a knife. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And speaking of that, they're doing a movie on Lorena Bobbitt right now.
Oh,
That's
no.
just coming out. So
Oh no.
I heard it's a cut above the rest.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But anyhow, but you're absolutely correct. People, we have a fear of truth.
Yeah.
And if we speak the truth, people will think we're being critical, or they think we're not supporting them, and they don't realize, no, we're trying to support you with truth, because we don't want to see you get hurt.
But as Jack Nicholson said in A Few Good Men, actually it was Tom Cruise, you can't handle the truth.
Yeah, you say
Yeah, that was Jack Nicholson
was
that
Jack
said it, yeah. But we can't. Dude, sometimes the truth is too raw and painful, and we're not either ready to hear it or whatever.
Right.
And, I know a lot of people who speak honestly and true, but people are always responding to them, angrily or with negativity, because they just either they don't know how to say it in a way that's receptive, or they say it and the people aren't ready to hear it. So,
Well, and I only hear half of what you say. The rest of it, I hear what my head's saying.
yeah.
And that happens. That's a universal truth, that when we're in that conversation, particularly when we're talking about relationships and things that are matters of the heart, issues of the heart, we hear only half of what the person's saying, and then our head takes over
Absolutely.
to protect us. And even though it thinks it's protecting us, it's really harming us.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think relationships are complicated at best. They
Yes.
don't teach you anything about it. There's not a course in any school that teaches you how to communicate and how to have a good relationship. We tend to learn how to communicate, and we tend to learn about our relationships from our families. Right?
Right.
And, unless we have some guidance, and either get some education in it, or get some guidance through, again, counseling or therapy, or just, if we're lucky to have really good role models,
Right.
then we're lucky.
And if I really can't live with myself, it's even more difficult to live with somebody else. And that's not calling anybody bad. It's just a fact of nature
Yeah.
because I see things through that lens and I hear that through those speakers that
Right.
you're saying one thing which may be perfectly innocent, but I'm hearing what I feel about myself.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll
Because
give
it
you,
all filters through that internal belief system and dialogue.
well, I'll give you a quick example of that. I had a member of a parish where I was a priest who was a retired DEA agent. And at that time, I was teaching at the Mexicali Police Academy as a favor to a friend. And every time I talk about going to Mexicali, he started saying, oh, please be careful, the cartel and all this. And what I was hearing is that he didn't think I could handle myself, that I was doing. And finally I said to him, Wayne, do you think I'm stupid? And he was shocked. He says, no, you're one of the smartest people I know. I care about you, and I don't want you to get hurt with all the violence going down there. But see, I didn't hear what he was saying.
Right.
What I heard was he thinks I'm stupid, he thinks I can't handle myself, and he never said that.
Right. 'Cause
My
it-
head said that.
right.
And when we go into relationships,
Yeah, I've had that happen before in
Right.
relationships. It's like, I didn't say that. I didn't mean that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what they heard.
and part of the relationship issue I found, and I'd like to get your comment, we only have a couple minutes left, but is being current with the relationship and not having a dual relationship. The relationship with the person I'm with and the relationship I was in that I just came out of that I think this person is as well.
Right.
That they say something, but I hear the other
Oh,
person
yeah.
speak.
That's very common for people to sort of carry in and project all of the sins of the past partners onto the current partner, even though they've done nothing to
warrant it.
to warrant it. Yes, and that happens more often than I would like to see because it's a very common thing, and that's usually one of the red flags in a relationship for sure, and that's one of those things that can make the milk go sour very, very quickly, is being blamed for other people's or treated in a certain way because of other people's sins, I'll call them.
Well, Gabby one time said to me when we're talking, she says, I'm not your ex-wife. I don't
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel those things about you. And I was shocked. And I said to her one time, I'm not your ex-husband. I support you in these things.
Right.
We have to be reminded.
Yes.
And we know it until we don't know it, and we have to be reminded again.
Right.
So, as a reminder, Frank's reminding me we're getting to the end of the show. We have only about
my
1 minute left.
Goodness.
But yeah,
That
time
went
goes
quickly.
flying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did.